Coming up next, the first episode of a brand new show here on VUTV called Whatcha Reading, a show where we talk to great leaders about great books. And who's the first guest on today's show? I'll give you a hint. Oprah Winfrey is not the first guest, but this person is even better. Coming up next, Whatcha Reading with Region Leaders.
In a world where entertainment is at risk, one man is given a mission, but he is about to face his biggest challenge yet. He will race against the clock and open doors to new possibilities that will save weekends as we know it.
What are you doing?
I'm looking for free movies.
Oh, I'll help you with that.
Just go to movies.valpo.edu. They have all the best movies, including The Hobbit and 22 Jump Street.
Whoa, it's that easy?
It's that easy.
Grab some popcorn, grab some buddies, and watch movies.valpo.edu's great selection.
What is passion? At Valpo, it's something that pours out of us uncontrollably. It's a late night shot of caffeine, cramming for finals, a jam session with friends. It sees deep into space, turns big stuff into small potatoes, floats boats and floods the senses. Passion is alive, it has a heartbeat, and it lives in you. How do we know? Because at Valpo, passion is who we are.
Welcome to Whatcha Reading with Region Leaders. Thank you so much for joining us on our first show. I'm your host, Steve Zelechoski, and I'm so excited about today's first guest because, quite frankly, this whole idea of Whatcha Reading started with Mark Chamberlain, my first guest today, the CEO of Lakeside Wealth Management. So Mark and I have known each other for about 4 years now, and about every 2 or 3 months we typically get together for breakfast or lunch. And inevitably, so many of these conversations end up going to one of us saying, hey, I read a great book recently, you gotta read this thing. And for the next couple minutes, we typically spend some time talking about why that book was so impactful for one of us, right? So the whole goal of this show is to highlight a region leader on each episode and a recent book that they read that had an impact on them, either professionally or personally. So to get to know Mark Chamberlain right now, take a look at the following package.
The company started in 2002, and it was sort of an encore to my first career, which was as a trader at the Chicago Board of Trade. I remember asking the question years ago to our employees, what's the most important thing we do? And they said, responsibly, we take care of our clients. And I said, actually, the most important thing we do is we take care of each other. The world headquarters is in Chesterton because that's where I grew up. And I felt like after my career as a trader in Chicago, so many years away from home, living there but not really contributing to the community, it was important to me to come back home. I think that one of the realizations that comes, and maybe it's from age or maybe it's from experience, is that there's just a lot more that I don't know. And it's been really fun exploring some of the stuff that I don't know and learning, even at my advanced age. To be a lifelong learner is really something that I'm passionate about. I really think my purpose is to teach. And that can take a lot of forms. But I think in my seat, I'm able to use some of my skills with money and financial advice. And I'm able to teach people about money, but also about lots of other stuff. To use my skills with money to be able to teach other things, that's what really fires me up. Well, I should say, other than my wife and children, my dog is one of my favorite things. Lou is, my best friend, man's best friend is your dog. It's the unconditional love part of it. I actually have learned a lot about relationships from my dog because the way they approach people non-judgmentally. They just love you and they just care about you regardless. Other things I like to do, I love to travel. It's one of my best things at this point. When you ask me my favorite place that I've ever been, a lot of things come to mind, but really it comes back to my roots. I'm 2/3 Irish, according to my DNA. And for the first time in my life, I got to go to Ireland a year ago for St. Patrick's Day. And I really felt like I was home. The passion of mine is to cook. It's something that my dad taught me was okay for a guy to do when I was a kid. And in fact, it's so important to me that we built our office with the centerpiece, the cultural center, the heartbeat of the office is a very large kitchen relative to the space of our office. If I take you to lunch, that's a nice gesture on my part. If I cook for you, that's a very vulnerable gesture. It's risky. You might not like it. It might not taste good. I might not prepare something. So there's a lot of risk involved in that. But what that does is it sets up a vulnerable exchange. So if I'm going to talk to somebody about a topic that's generally stressful, their finances can be, if I've already opened the door and am willing to be vulnerable with them through this expression of cooking, I make it a lot easier for them to open up back to me, which helps me do my job better for them.
So I'm so excited to welcome to the set my friend, CEO of Lakeside Wealth Management, Mark Chamberlain. Mark, thanks so much for being here, my
Good
friend.
to see you, Steve. It's
Absolutely,
always a pleasure.
you too. So Mark, talk about, you already heard that really our conversations were a lot of the impetus for this show. Talk about how impactful books are on you professionally.
Well, it was, being the CEO of a company, I took a really keen interest in leadership. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, I would ask other leaders, where their inspirations came from. And it always came back to a book, it seemed like. Mm. And so I got into this certain genre of author that talked about culture and leadership, and it just fascinated me. And then as you and I have done in the past, you always tell me the greatest book you just read, and I'm doing the same thing, and that's kind of how it's evolving.
I think it's apt to say that you can learn a lot about a person just by the books that he or she is reading, right?
Oh, very true. You can tell what they're passionate about. You can tell what their values are. You can tell what their weaknesses are and what they're willing to admit and open to improving.
Absolutely.
And it tells a lot about a person for sure.
Do you find yourself, just as it relates to books, when you think about how often you find yourself reading, how much do you read for business versus for pleasure?
Well, it's kind of changed with me over my life. I can remember as a teen and a 20-something reading a lot of fiction books. I like spy novels and stuff.
Wow.
But I would say...
pegged you as a spy novel kind of guy.
Oh, yeah, I'm very into the espionage. But the last 10 years, I don't think I've read anything that wasn't about, not necessarily business per se, but the approach to a business or the approach to relationships and people.
Interesting. And I think that's one of the reasons I always get so jazzed, after I leave our breakfast or lunch.
Yeah.
I always feel like I'm on cloud nine because they always are motivating. I think we're both attracted to some of the same types of not only books, but also thoughts and ideas. Something else that really strikes me about you, and I've always admired you for this, is your ability to network effectively with others. I mean, I forget how you and I first got to know each other 4 years ago, but talk a little bit about, the role that you see networking play in your personal or professional success.
Well, just a little bit of background, that my years at the Board of Trade, where I started as a trader, it was the exact opposite of what I try to do now. There was no reason for relationships. It was all about the next trade and dog eat dog. Wow. And what I learned was that that made my work a very lonely place. And so when I started Lakeside, I realized that it was better for business to make friends and network, but it also just made the whole process more enjoyable. And the things I've learned from asking people personal, intimate questions has taught me more about them than if I were to ask them the rote questions that you might normally ask in a business situations.
Absolutely.
That personal touch creates vulnerability, and that vulnerability creates the relationship.
Absolutely. So important to build that personal connection with somebody on the other side of the table. Folks, when we come back from break, you're going to hear about the book that Mark chose called Tribal Leadership, the impact that it's had on him both professionally and personally. Stay tuned for more Whatcha Reading with Region Leaders on VUTV.
VUTV, your campus, your story.
Welcome back to Whatcha Reading with Region Leaders here on VUTV. Today's book is Tribal Leadership, and the guest is CEO of Lakeside Wealth Management, Mark Chamberlain. So this book was written back in 2008. The paperback edition came out in 2011, and it's really all about how to leverage the dynamics that are naturally inherent in groups, tribes, organizations, in order to achieve overarching success, right? And Mark, what struck me about this book as I read it over the last several weeks was, it's not just written for leaders of organizations like yours. I found a lot of great personal information about this or from this book, just about how personally you can be successful. Why did this book have such an impact on you?
Well, first of all, 2008 was an interesting period for somebody to write a book about leadership when leadership was at a premium at that point. But I think one of the things I realized, the company wasn't that old at the time, and I really underestimated, I was the CEO by title. I started the company, but I didn't know that there was other stuff that went along with that. I didn't know that people followed me.
Right.
And listen to me, in a different way. Yeah. Now, deserved or undeserved,
that's debatable, right?
That's debatable. I just didn't realize that how impactful the things that I might do and say would be to the people who work for me. And this book put it into great perspective for me.
Absolutely. One of the fascinating things about this book was it talked about how leaders, through two things, through their language and through their relationships, they can elevate the tribes and the groups that they live in. So if you don't mind, just to give the audience a flavor of really the essence of this book talks about the 5 different stages that are inherent in every organization. And these don't just apply to tribes or groups, these apply to individuals as well. So the authors talk about the fact that stage one can best be summarized by the phrase, life sucks, right? And people who operate at this stage are miserable about everything. In fact, in the book, they talk about the fact that inherently, many prison systems and gangs operate at stage 1, life sucks. Stage 2 isn't so much about life sucking, but it's about my life sucking, right? And so think about all of those disconnected and disengaged folks that you may find yourself working with, right? Think about characters from the comic strip Dilbert, or from a movie like Office Space, or from the TV show The Office, right? Think about how many people just bemoan the life that they're living and blaming everybody around them for that stage 2 life. Right?
Yep.
You look no further than somebody's social media feed to see a lot of folks living at stage 2. Well, stage 3, what the authors suggest is that this is really where most organizations live. I think about 49% of American organizations operate at stage 3. And at stage 3, this is where I'm great and you're not, right? This is all about individual success. And Mark, the authors talk about the fact that for most organizations, it's about nudging, or it's about moving from a stage 3 culture to a stage 4 culture. If stage 3 is I'm great, then stage 4 is we're great. Not so much about individual achievements, but more about group or team achievements, right?
Yep.
Ultimately, stage 5, what the authors talk about is, if stage 4 is all about we're great, then stage 5 is all about life's great. And this is nirvana, right? Only about 2% of American workforce or American organizations operate here. And what the book talks about is oftentimes organizations will fluctuate between stages 4 and 5. So I guess, Mark, the question I have for you, based on the stages that these authors talk about, where do you see, you're 16 years into Lakeside Wealth Management right now, I think you said you started in 2002, where would you put Lakeside on these stages today?
Well, could I use your prop to explain it?
Feel free.
So you're right, it's only about 2% that end up at this stage 5. It's almost a perfect barbell curve, 2% on the bottom, about 23% on stage 2 and stage 4, and about 49, as you said, in stage 3. I'd like to think that our company is a stage 4.
Okay.
The interesting subtlety in the book is that you could be a stage 4 company, and you can, when things aren't going well, you can actually sink into 3 behavior.
Absolutely.
Or you can have moments of 5. A 5 is very rare, and it's also hard to maintain at all times.
Absolutely.
In fact, most 5s have more 4 moments than because it's just so hard to sustain that culture.
Right, right.
But I think our company is a 4 with 3 moments and 5 moments.
Okay.
And what I didn't realize was that how much influence I had as the leader of the tribe to pull people up to level 5, or if my mood personally was sour, that I could be the one that would deliver them back to 3. And so realizing that, leadership power was a really important thing for me, and this book helped a lot.
So that's interesting. You mentioned kind of where you are and how your mood, right, influences, those around you, which makes perfect sense as far as tribal leadership goes. Talk about where you think Mark Chamberlain lives in those stages, not so much from a Lakeside perspective, but from more of a personal perspective.
I think when I started this process, I was probably a 3, and I think through the great mentorship that I've gotten from the books that I've read and friends and colleagues just in life, I think I've made myself into a 4. I hope, and I really would like to. 5 is a high thing to strive for, but obviously, if I'm not striving for better, then I'm gonna succumb to worse.
Absolutely.
So I think that effort is in wanting to have that achievement. And I think those around you at your workplace, if they know that that's something that you're personally striving for, that, they're rooting for you.
Right.
And they want to be part of it. And it creates an energy that brings up the collective.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was struck at something they said in the book, that leaders, effective leaders, need to be able to talk at each one of these 5 stages, right? But that most people in these stages can only hear a stage above or a stage below. Talk a little bit about how that concept really impacts how you think about whether it be addressing Lakeside as a group, whether it be addressing certain people that you may be mentoring or that you may be leading on a daily basis.
Yeah, tribes are very powerful. In fact, they're self-cleansing, if you will.
Talk a little bit more. What do you mean about that, self-cleansing?
Yeah, you go through, you're hiring a new associate to work with, and they go through the interview process. You might take some, personality tests or stuff like that. But until you really are in the trenches with that person day to day, you don't know if they're sitting at their desk saying life sucks or I suck.
Right.
And, you can't get inside the head to find that. So what happens in the tribe is either the tribe changes behavior of a 2 or 3,
Right.
and brings that behavior up to a 4, or the tribe naturally weeds that person out. And it's not like, they physically harm them or anything like that. It's just that after a long enough period of time of the behavior being so different, that person doesn't feel like they even want to be at the tribe anymore. And the tribe is kind of saying to them, we don't really want you here either.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you see more of the former or more of the latter? Whereas folks will self-select out of a tribe where they don't think they belong, or the tribe will actually suggest, hey, this ain't cutting it, we need you to leave.
That's a good question, and here's the answer. If you've done a good enough job of voir diring and interviewing the person on the way in, then you can sort of limit the negative aspect of that. So here's what we've done. It's been really successful for us as far as the hiring process. We actually have many people involved in the hiring process.
Okay.
Let's say you're getting interviewed for an accounting position. Well, we have the accounting department visit with, go out to lunch with, get to know that person. Because look, if I'm hiring them, I'm not going to be sitting in the accounting department next to them every day.
Great point.
It's going to be the people in the accounting department. So they need to be part of the process, and they can edit the tribe.
Absolutely. So Mark, one thing I'd like to talk to you about after the break is, the authors talk about this epiphany that happens for many stage 4, stage 5 leaders in moving from stage 3 to stage 4. So let's talk a little bit more about that and how this book has impacted you personally right after the break. Folks, stay tuned for more Whatcha Reading with Region Leaders here on VUTV.
What is passion? At Valpo, it's something that pours out of us uncontrollably. It's a late night shot of caffeine, cramming for finals, a jam session with friends. It sees deep into space, turns big stuff into small potatoes, floats boats and floods the senses. Passion is alive, it has a heartbeat, and it lives in you. How do we know? Because at Valpo, passion is who we are.
Well, I think that's all we need. Thank you so much for coming in. We'll be in touch.
Okay, this is it. Just shake his hand and walk out with your head held high. Don't mess this up. Thank you. Nailed it. Don't let a bad handshake get in the way of getting the job you want. Find out more at the Career Center.
Good morning, Valparaiso University. What's a better way to start your day than with a new jam? And WVUR has just what you need.
If dying young won't change your mind, baby,
Broadcasting sports, news, weather, and music on air, online, and on campus. WVUR is my jam.
All right, so thanks for coming back to Whatcha Reading on VUTV. To wrap up today's session, Mark, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that not only are you an avid reader, but you're also writing your first book. Tell the audience a little bit about what it's about and why you're writing it.
Well, it's the working title is called Why Do I Work Here? And it's really a result of all this other reading that I've done and then interacting with peers and colleagues. And the sort of the subtitle under that is one company's journey to create the ultimate talent destination. And I think it has a kind of a bend towards millennials as we try to solve for the new workforce. How much does the new workplace need to change for the new workforce? But the book ends up really being an amalgam of all the authors and wisdom that I've heard over the years. And at one point I told one of the writers that's helping me with it was, I feel like I'm stealing everybody else's ideas. But she said, yeah, but you're repeating them with your own style and through your own experiences. So it made me feel a little bit better that there was some original thought in there, but it's been an interesting process. It's harder work than I thought it was.
Okay.
But it's a bucket list item for me. I'm glad to be doing it.
And when do you think it's going to hit bookshelves?
Well, I'm hoping if I can finish the editing process, that it would get published first quarter of next year.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, you have to promise me that when the book finally comes out, that you'll promise to come back on the show, and maybe it won't be called Whatcha Reading, but instead Whatcha Writing.
That's absolutely. And you'll be one of the first signed copies I give if you'll have it.
Well, I appreciate that. Now, you're still going to charge me $19.99?
No, we'll give you 10% off for that.
You're very kind. Mark, thanks so much
Yes,
for doing
sir.
this again. I
Always
really
a pleasure.
appreciate it.
Yes.
Folks, thank you so much for joining us on this first episode of Whatcha Reading with Region Leaders here on VUTV. I hope you come back for more episodes with great leaders sitting on that couch talking about great books that have impacted them both personally and professionally. So in the meantime, go out and get yourself a great book for you to read, and Godspeed. Thanks, everybody.